continuing our little three-part series of talking with the candidates for City Council in Rockland. There's one seat open now, being held by Brian Harden, who was here last week, and this week we're talking with Frank Iskanitis, and 2 weeks from today, because I'm going to be away next Wednesday, but 2 weeks from today, the 17th, at this time, we'll be talking to Dale Hayward, who recently announced and recently got his signatures in. So I adjust my microphone here. Maybe you haven't been able to hear me too well, but there, it might be better. So I want to welcome Frank Iskanitis to our studio. Hi.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome, and thank you for running for City Council. It's the second time that you've done that. Is that right?
Yes, and you know what it's like to be on that side of the dais.
Yes. Well, I found my time on the City Council to be interesting. A lot of people say, "Oh, it must be a thankless job," but it's not true. People thank you, in fact, and I thank you for running. This is a little unusual that there are three people running for one open seat. An interesting thing, and raises a whole question with our system, our electoral system, in that it's going to just go to whoever gets the plurality of votes. We don't have runoffs in most countries. In this situation, there would have to be a runoff election between the two top vote getters, but we don't do that. We didn't do that in our election for governor the last time around, so anyway, we're into that. Frank, why don't we, before I get into introducing you in more detail, let me just ask listeners if you would get a pencil and paper. You could write down the phone number here, and I will give it now, and then I will give it again in a few minutes. So if you're still scrambling for that pencil and paper, you could use a pen. You could write it on your back of your hand, whatever. But that number is 593-0013. We don't have anyone answering the phone in the other room, so it will ring here. I will pick it up. I'll say, "Hi, WRFR, you're on the air," and you can ask your question, make your comment. Give us a couple of minutes to get rolling here, but we'd be very, very glad to get your call. That number again, 593-0013, and I'll give it again in a little while. Frank, tell us a little about yourself. How long have you been in Rockland now?
8 years. I've been a Mainer for a little more than 8 years, and we'll be in Rockland. We closed on the inn in December of 2004.
So closed on the inn. Tell us about what you do here in Rockland.
Well, I am the co-owner with my domestic partner, P.J. Walter, of the Lime Rock Inn, which for a lot of folks maybe that are in the listening audience know as Dr. Laurie's house. It's an 8-room bed and breakfast, was Rockland's first bed and breakfast. Opened in 1994, changed hands in 2002, and then we purchased from that owner in 2004. I serve as chairman of the Comprehensive Planning Commission currently with the city, and as a member of the Tax Assessment Review Board and the ever-popular Odor Committee member.
Yes.
Beyond that, I am this year's president of the newly merged Penobscot Bay Regional Chamber of Commerce, which, as you know, we successfully completed the merger of what had formerly been the Rockland-Thompson Area Chamber of Commerce and the Camden-Rockport-Lincolnville Chamber of Commerce in 2011, and I was slated through the hierarchy to be the incumbent president. I am a past member of Rockland's Economic Development and chair of Rockland's Economic Development Advisory Committee, and was an original founding principal of Rockland Main Street.
I see. Okay, so you could say that you've been actively involved in community affairs here in Rockland. Is that something that you just started to do since coming to Rockland, or have you been involved in where did you live before?
I grew up in New Jersey is really where I am from. Born and raised there. My parents in a job transfer ended up in suburban Atlanta when I was in high school. So actually finished high school and college, and attended Georgia State University, which is located in the city of Atlanta. Obtained an undergrad degree in, well, what they refer, it's a Bachelor's of Business Administration, so it's a BBA, in what they call Real Estate and Urban Affairs. So it's essentially a planning and finance relating to municipal matters. I was a commercial bank, actually started my professional career as a bank examiner, and my age will show because I was a bank examiner for the old FISLIC insurance fund, which was the Savings and Loan Institution Insurance Fund that was dissolved in the late 1980s due to the savings and loan crisis. But moved into commercial originations, worked basically as a commercial banker for the remainder of that career, and the last 10 years specifically in the government guaranteed loan programs like SBA and USDA. So in my occupation, there's always been a governmental aspect to what I did, but I did also serve in my community, Long Hill Township, New Jersey, where I ended up settling and buying a home when I met PJ, served on their zoning variance board.
And that's it. That's all you did. You came here, you just branched out into just about everything. But nobody could say that you don't have experience in Rockland affairs at this point. Well, look, you're running for city council. Why are you running? What is it that you want to bring to the city council?
Well, a new way of looking at things. One of the lessons, there's a perception, because I think you and I both fall into the general category of from away. I think sometimes there's a perception that our values may be incongruent with those who've been here for generations preceding. And I'll tell you, I was pleased. I was going to say pleasantly surprised, but I wasn't surprised. In going through the process of merging the cultures of the chamber and meeting with folks, and the time I've spent on the Economic Development Advisory Committee, when now it's a regular occurrence that Camden, Rockport, Rockland, and Thomaston are meeting collaboratively on a regular basis. What we found is really when we sit down at the table, there's not a divergence of values. We have the same sort of set of core values. And with that recognition, we've been able to, build upon a platform of making our quality of place, which is an asset, put it at the forefront of what we're all about, and finding a way to take what we have, make it relevant to today's life and society, and sustainable for the future.
Well, let's get a little bit more specific, though. A new eye is a nice idea. If somebody who hasn't been on the council is running for the seat of somebody who is on the council, let's obviously say we need new blood. But what's that new blood going to bring in terms of specific ideas about where we're going as a city, what kind of policies we want to have, how the city council should behave? What ideas do you bring?
You mean in terms of general strategy for what I'd like to see happen?
Let's take it from there, yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess the first and foremost, before we went on air, we were discussing the taxation situation, and you and I said the same thing, looking at it sort of from different perspectives. For what values truly are in Rockland, we should have a $30 mill rate. And I was saying, with values the way they are based on the reval in 2005, we should have a $10 mill rate. And I think both of us were just kind of sort of pulling numbers out of the air. But we're in this perfect storm of a situation where we went through the reval process in 2005 at what amounted to be the pinnacle,
the peak of the market,
of the real estate market.
So everybody is aware that their property is valued for tax purposes at more than it's worth in today's market. That's certainly my experience.
Yes. And the predicament in that we quickly want to pass the buck on to the assessor and say he needs to fix this. But as in often the instance, when you look at the state statute, his obligation to move is when we fall out of a ratio, either 10% or 10% above or below. Yes. The aggregate valuation. And
Do you think we're within that range at this point?
Each year he's certified it. He's certified as of April 1st.
He says so.
Well,
a lot of people wonder whether how that can be.
But there are qualified sales that are he's certifying those numbers based on qualified transactions that have occurred. I think part of the predicament might be that on the residential side, there may just not be a lot selling. And I think or if it is and it's selling low, it's being offset by the investment that's going in on Main Street and some of the buildings that, in essence, are still end up selling higher than what they're assessed at. And so they're aggregating the number back out to a net within that 10% threshold.
Well, I guess the skeptic, like I guess myself, might say, well, there's bound to be a lot of political pressure not to reduce these values for the simple reason that people look at the mill rate, and if we were to have a revaluation that significantly lowered these valuations, then the city council would have to be telling people, well, now your mill rate is higher, because that's what would happen. So do you think that from the point of view of both the city bureaucracy and the city council, it's very inconvenient to have that happen?
Yeah, so to your point, which is what the question you originally asked me, we've got to get into the meat of that budget and find out why is it that, glaringly, with an overview look at the budget, I don't see any places where there's an easy, low-hanging piece of fruit to say, we need to make a big cut to that budget, that component of the budget there. And so we need to...
Well, let me ask you what I asked Brian. Have you made any kind of a study, any kind of comparison of what we spend, and I'm going to pick two items because they're the two biggest items. Well, the three biggest items, clearly, without any question, are police, fire, and public works, okay? I just did a little, but really it requires much more than I did, but I took a look at Belfast, which is very much the same size as Rockland now, and they spend half as much on their police department, and a seventh as much on the fire department. They have a volunteer fire department. So what about that? Have you made any attempt to compare what we do with other towns to see whether, in fact, people manage to spend less?
Well, the difficulty in doing a comparison, because I have, or I've attempted to, that sort of numbers are done on a per capita basis. And if the perpetrators of crime would just be so kind and committed in their own jurisdiction, we could get some accurate data. And the predicament we have as a service center economy, and I know Belfast is on a smaller scale. The mayor in the past has touted a number, and I think somewhere between the double and triple. We're roughly 7,500 people, and we roughly somewhere grow each day between 2 and 3 times that in terms of the number of human beings within the city limits because of the service center, the office park, and I don't know that Belfast had that daily influx at the same level we do.
Well, they certainly have a daily influx. I mean, they also serve as a center for a wide area around, but how it compares exactly, I don't know. But it just seems to me that there ought to be some effort to make an objective analysis of what we need and what's reasonable to spend. To spend on our police, to spend on fire, public works, and I don't see that happening at all. What I see is year after year after year, you take last year's budget and add a little to it. That's what we do every year. And the city council goes through the budget, with a fine-tooth comb, theoretically, which is, to me, complete nonsense, because the city council has no way of being able to understand every line in that budget, but that's what we do. And it just keeps growing, and there's no stepping back and looking at what are we spending our money on, what is reasonable, could we make significant savings, could we do things differently? I've never seen that happen.
And it's well, so then we need to do that. And I would think in the next process, if I was on, we would be looking at it at that level, because one of the predicaments, we're also we are not fully staffed in the police department. So I know we have a situation where, in order to make up for the shifts for not having a full staff, we're having to pay overtime. You know, and I know, my partner PJ is on the hiring committee for the city, and today an envelope was dropped off with some potential candidates for the interview process that's going to occur, shortly. For some candidates,
but how do we? Okay, well, I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No.
How do we know whether the schedule of patrols, etc., that they're filling, that this is really what we need to do? I look at it and I say, well, wait a minute. Why are we paying policemen to drive around town to, see what's happening in the streets? We could have, everybody in Rockland has a cell phone. We could have a whole bunch of citizens who would be known to the police department, who would go through some kind of training and could call in and say, you know what, there's something weird going on down here. There's a fight outside this house. And people would do that without without asking to be paid. Why aren't we taking advantage of this kind of technology, for example? Why are we just assuming that whatever the police department says is right? Well, we have a call, so maybe somebody's got the answer to that.
Okay.
So I'm going to... Hello, you're on the air, WRFR.
Yes, hi. Very interesting show. And my opinion is looking at police department and fire department is not rational. And we need to think about industry and what we have a lot of. And what I see a lot of is rubber tires at the dump. Why don't we start making shoes with rubber bottoms? Use these tires, the rubber tires. They're sitting there. Let's use and recycle things and create industry.
Let me ask you, why is it that it doesn't make any sense to question how much we spend on the fire department and the police department and the public works department?
Because we need them.
But how do you know how much we need to spend on them?
Because I believe that they tell the truth.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, do you want us to take your question about the rubber shoes?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Okay. Thank you very much for your call.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye. So, what do you think about that?
Well, I believe the city already has the rubber tires that are there for recycling, and I believe at some point they will be picked up.
It doesn't seem to be much of a market for rubber tires. At least I know that the city, that you have to pay to drop off your tires there,
Right.
and it's substantial. I've always been surprised, but it does seem hard for me to believe that this is how we're going to solve our tax issues in Rockland.
That component. Well, you asked me for multiple ideas, and
Yes.
and another one that comes to mind is because let me just say, to close out on the issue of police and fire.
Yes.
I see fire and EMS. I was a volunteer EMT. I forgot to mention that. I'm sorry.
All right.
But I was for a period of years
would hold that against you.
in New York
Yes.
State, and in the community I lived in, the municipality I lived in. We had paid people during the day, and then did it vigilante or volunteer in the overnight, and so I've been a part of that, and I've often wondered why, at least with half the shifts, that was never done, and perhaps that's a dialogue that we could have to look to fill, because there you can have some comfort, because in order to be licensed as an EMT, whether you're paid or volunteer, you go through a rigorous training, and there's a standard of quality of care. So I would believe that, and in order to drive the rig, you have to go through training and be certified. All of these components factor in, so it would take off the table the issue of potentially of quality of care. So there, I would see maybe some potential there, although I'm sure all the EMS folks or EMTs and on the force in Rockland are probably screaming at me right now.
Well, there you go. I mean, isn't that the problem? I remember when I ran for the city council, I had been on a committee. It was there was a comprehensive plan committee, something not to administer it, but to come up with a new comprehensive plan. This is like 20 years ago. And then there were subcommittees, and I became the chair of a subcommittee on city facilities and services. And we took our charge to be, let's look at the city's facilities and services and what do we need and how much should we be spending on them. And we did a look at it, and we came up with this conclusion that that our spending on public works was in the sort of normal range. It seemed appropriate, but we were spending quite a bit more than the going rate for our fire and police departments. So when I ran for the city council, I said, we have to look at that. And the way I ran was I sent a letter to everybody in Rockland. I said, I'm running, this is what I think, and if you agree, vote for me. And people did vote for me. So I saw out there a willingness to take this on. But after I was elected to the city council, I met with the then fire chief, and he just let me know that if I would mess with his budget, he would quit. All right, he told me that right off, and it was just so clear. Nobody else on the city council was willing. It's like you were saying, these guys are going to be screaming at me. What about that? We have people, the money that we spend, the money that I just sent in $7,500 to the city, okay, that money is going to pay people. Those people like to get that money. They have a lot to say about what goes on in Rockland. Who is going to stand up to them?
Well, I am on behalf of the citizens. If I get in, I'm going to. That's my role.
Yes.
Because it's not. It's not personal. It's not intended to be accusatory. It's saying, can we meet a standard in a cost efficient way that works for everyone? Again, we're back to, because if we're not new and innovative in terms of revenue streams and curving, all we're left with is raising the mill rate or cutting the budget in terms to get any savings. So in that respect, I would certainly look to hope to explore. I think of our current fire chief, and I know he's an amenable kind of guy.
Fine fellow.
So maybe we could have that chat if we needed to have that chat, or talk about, are there possibly outside grant funding sources for special projects, or because we're a historic community. We've I don't know if the historic residential neighborhood historic district extends all the way over to where your house is, but I know my house sits within what's been defined as Rockland's residential historic district, and I guess what this old house just touted last year as one of the best neighborhoods to buy an old house in.
I want to come back to that because that really feeds into something else. But go ahead and finish what you were saying.
I don't know where I was going with that.
All right,
you and I both have short attention span.
There you go. Rockland has this incredible resource in a magnificent old housing stock, which is currently valued fairly low. You can buy an incredible house for very little money in Rockland compared to the rest of the country, compared to Camden, compared to just about anywhere. And what about that? Isn't that something that we should be developing? This comes back to something that I asked Brian Hart, and I mentioned to you before the show. I asked him, would it be a good thing or a bad thing if real estate values were to increase in Rockland? Now, I understand that from the point of view of what taxes people, if you just said suddenly everything was worth twice as much in Rockland, people's mill rate would go down to half, but they'd be paying the same amount, so that's it. But if values rise because people are investing, as somebody obviously did in the building that you're using, okay, I mean, you must be paying substantial tax on that. Somebody developed that property, made it really beautiful.
Everything they did cosmetic. I've spent I'm into six figures in terms of new slate and copper roof, rewiring to eliminate knob and tube, new plumbing, That's an observation more than it is a criticism. But I understand exactly where you're coming from. And you and I sort of touched on. You and I met 6 or 7 months ago, looking at chickens outside of Primo with TAC, and we were
my son Takuma, right?
Yes, and we were talking about, at that point you were looking at exploring something with the Lincoln Street School, and I said the predicament that we're in is if the value of that building is $200 or $200,000, but there's $200,000 worth of work that needs to be done to it immediately in order to make it habitable and usable, then its net present value is zero.
Yes, which is the case.
And the same can be true for our aged housing stock. That items of deferred maintenance maybe make every house worth. Again, if it were to transfer and you were to need to, we got stuck in a spot when we bought on the issue of knob and tube. We had the same insurance. Basically the same policy, the same carrier, the same coverage. Maybe I upped the limits a little bit more because I'm a little bit more conservative, but everything was the same between the previous owner and me. And they still came in and did a property inspection because in their eyes they were underwriting a new policy because they were underwriting me and PJ as well as the property. And they found that some of the knob and tube was still active, and we were given a notice, and it basically said, have this undone in 30 days or we're going to cancel you.
Right.
To which my wonderful insurance agent, Joanne Billington of the Allen Agency, sorry for the gratuitous plug.
Yeah, mine too, by the way.
Worked with us to work with the insurance company to give us time to get that done. But it was an expense that had to be taken care of. And it was $7,000 or $8,000 at the end of the day that hadn't been factored into my acquisition and startup and development costs of the project.
But how does it affect it? That doesn't affect the value from the assessed value of the real estate.
Well, no, but it affects the market value, and theoretically,
eventually it will be reflected.
If we're supposed to be at market value. To your point, I've actually had preliminary conversations with pretty much all the interested parties except the city attorney, but I wouldn't, and you're an attorney, you can maybe help me answer this question.
Probably not, but I'll try.
What I would like to propose, if I were to get on the city council, because the predicament that we have is that I don't foresee us being able to significantly cut the mill rate. The numbers drive whether or not we get to adjust the values or not, and in the absence of a lot of fluff or low-hanging fruit to go after to make cuts or have a significant increase in revenue from an alternate source, we're at a tough spot. And we're at a tough spot with a high mill rate and a high assessed rate. And what I was proposing is if we can find a way to start a program to help the citizens of Rockland, because what I'm hearing from folks who are sort of our age, that not just retired.
That's old, by the way. They can't see us.
Well, okay, he talked about using a pen to write down the number instead of programming it in your smartphone or typing it into your iPad. But
well, there you go.
Creating a tax rebate program, and that would start out. That would run 10 years in term. For the first 5 years, you could take a rebate, say 10% of your tax bill. And so in Rockland, the average bill is around $3,000. That means, so for the first 5 years, you'd have a credit with the city for $300 for a total of $1,500. And then you'd potentially have another 5 years on the back end to use that, either combined with your own savings or go to, we got the PACE program approved for Rockland last year. I've had the conversation with Richard Regal Burbank at Evergreen. He said the average ticket, it's coincidental, or kismet, that my little pool would be $1,500 because the average bill or the average ticket for Evergreen services in Rockland, he said he's writing now, is about $15,000, so that's about 10%. So if we could offer folks a tax break in order to get them to invest in their property and work on some of these deferred maintenance items, maybe at the end of the day, what we'd have, we'd have the same housing stock, but we'd have some of that deferred maintenance taken care of, and maybe at the end of the day, those values might be closer to being truer because those deferred maintenance items are taken care of.
You heard it first here, the Frank Iskanitis stimulus program for Rockland real estate. And it's certainly an interesting idea. Bottom line, it seems to me, so you tell me what you think about this. Bottom line is that what we need in order for each of us to not be so burdened with our real estate taxes is to have more people helping us to pay those taxes.
Right, as long as you increase the denominator, you're always going to decrease the increase.
So we need to encourage people to come to Rockland, buy these houses, and fix them up. To me, that's the bottom line for us. It's great to be encouraging business, but the statistics are pretty clear that retail businesses don't improve our tax situation, even when they make investments here, because they also bring with them a lot of expenses. Industrial businesses, in many cases, can help a lot, but I don't see that as a big future for us right now. The thing that really works is people with some means, middle-class people, come and invest in Rockland and make those buildings into something special. Well, we have another call, so let's try that. Maybe there'll be a more intelligent question than I've been asking. Okay. Hello, you're on the air, WRFR.
Yes, hi. It would be helpful to have it possible to do home improvements and not have any change in valuation occur until the property was sold. Lots of places do that. So unless a property changes hands, you're not going to be assessed a higher rate because you want to improve your property. And the city could decide to do that.
Do you think that I could certainly see that making a lot of sense with something like what Frank Iskanitis was saying about changing the wiring, working on plumbing. If you built an addition on your house, would you still think that was a reasonable rule?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Because that's showing that, for one thing, more of a sense of permanence, commitment to the community, and that you're going to live there.
Well, if you would stay on the line, let's give Frank a chance to respond to that.
I guess. Are you caller? Are you talking like a situation in California, like a Prop 13, where your taxes are frozen for a period of time?
Well, what she's saying is that you're assessed. Your assessment doesn't go up if you invest in the property. If you improve the property, even you add onto it, you don't pay anything until the property is sold. Or I suppose a variation on that would be that it would be deferred for 10 years or something, or until the property was sold.
So that could. So if you're adding square footage. Theoretically, that would add to your overall assessment.
Yes.
And in order to encourage the investment, offer an abatement over a period. Yeah, I don't know if it would be indefinite, but an abatement over a period of time. That could potentially be a viable alternative, because we want to do something to encourage investment in Rockland's housing stock.
Yes, and that's what the caller is suggesting. This would be a way of doing it. Right now, you have a sort of disincentive because your taxes will go up if you build something, add onto your house.
That there's the theory of functional obsolescence with 100-year-old Victorian housing stock. For example, my house has twin parlors when you walk in the front door, because that's the way folks lived, with a ladies' parlor and a gentleman's parlor, because that's how they socialized. But today we don't live that way. And so if you were doing the addition to add a den or add another bedroom,
to have the option.
What's that?
Unless you're lucky enough to have the option. Sorry, joke.
I want to ask the caller something. I'm remembering years ago reading about and his last name was George, Henry George. And he actually ran for governor of New York at one point and almost was elected. And he wrote a book, the name of which I can't remember, but his basic idea was that real estate taxes should be based purely on the land value and not on any improvements that you make, because taxing the improvements it discourages people from making those improvements. Have you ever heard of that? What do you think of that idea?
Are you asking me?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
I've done a lot of research into alternatives for increasing taxes based on, maintaining homes, and that name must have come up amongst it. I think that land, of course, is depending on where it's located. Well, actually, in Rockland, all the land is pretty valuable now. Mm-hmm. There aren't places to build, they say.
Not in town, anyway.
But Mr. Esganitis didn't get to finish his Victorian parlor train of thought, and I wondered what he was going to say.
Well, so what I was going to say, the reason you might want to do an addition is because you had another kid, or you want to add a den, or you don't want the Victorian kitchen like I have, that was a utilitarian room for servants, not to be occupied by the family, where it's the heart and home, a heart and soul of a home, and you wanted to do that kind of addition. That makes sense, because that's how we live today. If you were to go out, say, to what's that development referred to as the Meadows, Meadowway and Littlefield Drive, those houses are built to a more modern living standard with a smaller living room, maybe a dining room and a den. And so if you wanted to do that in town and get offered an abatement, I think that's a good idea too. I guess what I would say is, why haven't we been thinking about these things as a way to encourage investment, in our housing stock?
And what about a moratorium on new building until all existing stock is occupied?
Well, what I'll say with the as chair of comprehensive plan, and prior to me being chair and just being a member of the Comprehensive Planning Commission, and when there was still an entity known as Gateway 1, one of the components or aspects that we worked on in the master plan and in the comprehensive plan was to work to, as Joe pointed out, encourage in-town infill development where it's available, and discourage development that would force us to have to add infrastructure further out, which would only add to the base that we have to maintain. And so I don't know. This is where I guess I differ then from the current administration in terms of zoning and planning should be the aspirations for what you want to be, and they should be used as tools to encourage the desired behavior for what you want. And I don't think we'd necessarily have to put a moratorium in place. I think what we would do is just encourage people to develop the way we want them to develop.
And yet, on the other hand, and you can tell me when I should get off, because...
It's all right. We're happy to have you.
Okay. Where was I going with that?
Welcome to our club.
Well, there are so many things one could talk about.
Yes.
The Gateway 1 plan was, I found it odd, and the infrastructure, all that, doesn't really address the fact that if it didn't cost people to upkeep, to improve, to do home improvement. If it wasn't a red flag, to say, hey, this property is looking better than it has in a long time, so, we've got to increase its value and the taxes, there would still be a lot of work for a lot of people, and that's always part of the argument, in maintaining these homes and in doing the construction. New construction doesn't always, especially new construction, does not exactly guarantee jobs for local
Well, why don't we leave it at that? We'll bat that around, and I want to thank you very much for calling.
Yes, thank you.
And I hope you're listening in a couple of weeks when Dale Hayward is here, and we'll call again.
It'll be interesting.
Well, good, thank you. I hope so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. So, there you go. Real questions. And, it is, and this is, maybe kind of beyond the scope of a program which is designed to try to help voters distinguish the various candidates. But the fact is that the whole business of reliance on property tax has been a kind of disaster for American communities, because it means, for example, that wealthy communities have lots of money, no problem, their taxes are low, and poor communities, their taxes are high. And the difference between Rockland and Camden is just an obvious example. And then if you look at Camden, New Jersey, I was just reading something about their situation, is a complete disaster.
Yet New Jersey has, from a municipal perspective, has I think 3 of the top 5 or top 10 wealthiest municipalities in the country.
Right. And probably not very far away from Camden, New Jersey, there probably be some very rich towns, and that's what's happened. And one reason that it's happened is the automobile, because it used to be, if you wanted to have a business, for example, your employees had to live nearby. And you had to live nearby. Now your employees can live 20 miles in one direction, and you can live 20 miles in the other direction. So it's allowed this increasing class segregation in America, and the effect of that is disastrous for the poorer communities, and Rockland is, relative to the communities around us now, quite poor.
Well, but you bring up an interesting point, and one of the reasons we talked about and worked towards and ended up eventually merging the chambers is just that I wish I could read my third quarter newsletter from the chamber newsletter, my third quarter letter to the membership in the third quarter chamber newsletter, because it talks about
you can't go.
it talks about the word.
Yes.
It talks about what community means to me.
Yes.
And it talks about the idea that 50 years ago, people lived, worked, played, went to school. The municipal boundaries and the geographic boundaries in which people existed were congruent. Were pretty. If you lived in Rockland, mom and dad. If you were blue collar, mom and dad worked at the fish plants or somewhere, or dad was an attorney and mom was a stay at home.
Okay,
you need to answer that.
Well, I don't need.
We got another caller.
We got another caller.
I'm excited
to go with it. Yes. Hey, hello. You're on the air, WRFR.
This is the same caller with another hat. What would Mr. Iskanitis change, if anything, about the way City Council is presented, how it's run, length of time that is spent on issues? Could he please address that?
Okay, good. And that's a question I need to be asking. So I'm going to let you go again, but we'll put Frank on the spot there. Okay. Yeah, what are you going to do? I mean,
we have been
having this fun talk, but
yeah, sure.
but what's going to change with you on the council?
An emphasis on shared core values, and in some instances, I started to talk about this and where I was going before, in attacking the right villains instead of the wrong villains.
Who are the right villains to attack?
Well, I'm going to make an observation. This does not reflect my opinion necessarily on these two issues, but let's talk about the imminent departure of Walmart from Rockland's municipal boundaries, to a point where they're literally, even I could throw a stone from the town line to where they're going to be.
Thomason. Yes.
So the argument is, we're still going to have, to your point earlier, we're going to have to deal with the consequence of that and get none of the tax benefit now.
Right.
But there was a point in time when they wanted to, before my tenure here in town, where they wanted to expand across the street. And there was an initiative that squelched that, prevented that from happening. And
Well, that isn't exactly what happened. I was on the city council at the time.
okay,
And look, if they had wanted to do something that was allowed in Rockland, they would have just done it. They needed to ask us to change our zoning to accommodate them. So there's something, spot zoning, okay? How do you feel about that? Should we do that? And should we only do it for big, rich corporations, or should we do it for a little guy?
well, is it spot zoning if you're correcting a miszoning that's put an arbitrary zoning that's put somewhere? I'll go to Walgreens. The number one argument when Walgreens was looking to come in town, yes, that corner was zoned residential B, but the other three corners there are zone C2 because that intersection is the busiest intersection between Brunswick and Ellsworth in terms of traffic count. That's an asset to the municipality of Rockland, the number of cars that go by there. When we think about when Rockland's downtown was in its heyday, and we think about Coffins, and we think about Center Crane, and we think about the local stores that were there, our memory seems to forget that there was a Sears Roebuck there, there was a Woolworths there was a Grant's. The facade of the Farnsworth was a J.J. Newberry's. These were national chain stores. And they were all there in that configuration because in that era, retail chased the pedestrian traffic. And the retail model has evolved now that they chase the vehicular traffic. And so we have that. And what I'm not understanding about the rezoning of that corner is we had somebody, you said we need people to come and invest. We had an entity that was coming and willing to invest $750,000 in publicly funded road improvements, triple the tax base for the existing lots that were there, and provide between 20 and 25 jobs to local folks, in addition to the interim construction jobs, on a corner that has 3 commercial parcels. And the number one argument was we don't need another pharmacy. And yet 3 years later, another pharmacy opened less than 1/10 of a mile away on a smaller scale in an existing office building that's been revamped from a mill. But that and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing that he's there. I don't have a need. I don't have a chronic illness or a chronic need to have prescriptions filled. So I don't have a regular pharmacy that I go to. But I understand for folks who do that Jensen's has been wonderful. But I'm saying from a municipal perspective, what he contributes is already contributed in our budget because that's the tax bill of the owner, not him as a tenant.
Well,
and so to make
obviously we're not going to settle this. I mean, you're onto a jag here that definitely I would be ready to argue with you on, because the same as the Walmart. The fact is that the amount of tax that the Walmart pays doesn't begin to cover the cost that they create for the city of Rockland, and that is the whole thing. And this is what I've never understood, Frank, and I want you to explain this to me. The reason we have high taxes, and I asked Brian this, and he also, we have high taxes because we're a service center. So we're going to solve the problem by being more of a service center. I don't get it. I just don't get it. How does that compute?
No, I don't. I think we have. I wouldn't say we have high taxes because we have underutilized assets that are not providing us with the return that they should to increase that denominator and lower the incremental obligation per individual. I don't think that.
Well, I mean, people repeat that forever, and the evidence is very, very clear. The taxes in towns that aren't shopping centers are lower.
Can I?
And you were just talking about all the people who come into Rockland, okay? And they come in because of these businesses. And
where is your data that shows that your empirical data that they cost us more?
Well, that's what I started by saying. I don't have that study in front of me. I've read this, okay? So we just have to, we'll have to leave that for further review. But this is, the fact that service centers suffer from tax difficulties is something which is constant, it is not
talk
disputed.
To South Portland.
Yeah.
You'd think having the mall and all the mall. I don't disagree with you.
And I wonder how it's all worked out for Freeport. They thought this was the going to be the godsend, and I don't think that it's been so great for the residents of Freeport that there's been all that development.
Along the Route 1 corridor, of road.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna have to wind down, and I got to give you the last word here. And we've got just 5 minutes to go. So I want to thank you. I want to thank our callers. And I just want to give you a chance to put in your pitch for why people should vote for you for the city council.
Okay, here we go. Well, I want to thank you for including me. I want to thank the callers for calling. I would like to be the next counselor because I believe I have something to contribute. If it's innovation, I didn't get to tout my biggest, the thing I'm most excited about. Are you familiar with the recent update that was done to the Brookings Institute's Charting Maine's Future?
No, I'm not.
Well, in 2006, Grow Smart Maine requested that the Brookings Institute complete a study on the Maine economy to give recommendations and ideas for how to improve. And earlier this year, they asked them to come back with an update saying we're 6 years in. How are we doing? There was only one tourism-related entity that was named in that entire report, and it was the Historic Inns of Rockland, an entity that my partner and I are intimately involved in. And we were recognized for creativity and innovation in the tourism sector for helping to build Rockland's brand and Rockland's tourism experience, and doing it in a communal way where we've raised $50,000 through the Paisan Parade event for the Area Interfaith Outreach Food Pantry. By the way, I want to talk about a couple of things relating to my campaign. Don't look for signs for me. Don't look for door cards for me. Don't look for me knocking on your door. You would be afraid. No.
I can. Listeners can't see you. He's a fine, handsome guy.
In this era of, as we were talking about before we went on the air, we are being bombarded with so much insanity. I do not want to be a part of that. And as far as I'm concerned with the signs and the placards, there's better use for that money. And so if you would be interested in supporting me, I'm telling folks to please contact the Area Interfaith Outreach Food Pantry and make a donation equal to the amount that you would give to me to use in my campaign. Because then it would be going for something worthwhile and useful in helping to feed a family or help somebody out with heating oil at this time of year, or begin to address that issue. And I have other speaking engagements and will be available. I have a Facebook page at facebook.com/vote for Frank.
Vote for Frank, okay.
And I'm doing small home gatherings rather than to get the word out. So if you're interested in hosting one, if you don't know enough about me, one of the things I realized, because I am involved in the business community, that I sort of the last time went on a presumption that other people would know who I am, and I understand that not everyone does. I would be happy if you were willing to host, to come and speak to your friends, and you could hear straight from me how I feel. frankisgonitis@yahoo.com, or you can go like that Facebook page, facebook.com/vote for Frank, and send me a message that way. Okay. Or you can send me a letter at the old-fashioned way, yes. Grandpa Joe, at Frank Isgonitis, 96 Lime Rock Street,
96 Lime Rock Street.
Yeah, 04841. And
that's the Lime Rock Inn. So if people don't remember any of this, they could look up the Lime Rock Inn and they can find you there. Okay.
There we go.
Well, we've got to go. We've got 1 minute to go, and I just want to remind listeners that we have been talking with Frank Iskanitis, who's a candidate for the Rockland City Council, the seat that's now held by Brian Hardin, who is also running for re-election. There's another candidate in the race, Dale Hayward. And he will be on this show 2 weeks from today. We will not have a show next week because I'm going to be away. And we have, well, let's see, is there a show coming on after ours? I don't think so. No. There are some people out there in the studio, but there are not. So thank you very much for calling in, those who did. Thanks for listening, and thanks for supporting in various ways this radio station, which is a wonderful thing, I think, for Rockland to have, if I can toot my own horn, since you've been doing it for so
well, in the greater community, I started to touch on that before, that we're not just Rockland anymore. The way we live today, we don't live within those municipal boundaries.
Anyway, we have to say goodbye, so goodbye.